6 months had passed since the incident near the Kepler. Nebula changed everything. Captain Daniel Foster stood in the new headquarters of the Galactic Defense Initiative, an organization that had been created specifically to prepare the Federation for the return of the Harvesters. The building itself was constructed in a style that blended human architecture with the designs of a dozen other species. It represented something new in the galaxy, a true partnership between civilizations that had previously operated in isolation from one another. Foster's office was modest, despite his elevated status. He preferred to keep things simple. The walls displayed images of Earth, photographs of mountains and oceans and forests that most species in the galaxy had never experienced. These images helped him remember why he had come to this position. He had come because Earth had taught him something valuable. He had come because Deathworlders understood the price of survival in ways that peaceful species could not. A communication arrived on his desk from Admiral Victoria Grant. The Federation's military structure was being reorganized. New protocols for responding to existential threats were being implemented across all sectors. And more importantly, the first classes for the new Deathworld Tactics Academy would be opening within 3 months. Officer Kyle Harrison had been appointed as the Academy's primary instructor, supported by Dr. Elena Vasquez and engineer Marcus Phillips. The message also contained something unexpected. The Federation Council was requesting that Foster accept a formal position as the Director of Interspecies Defense Cooperation. It was a title that represented unprecedented authority. It meant that Foster would have direct access to the Council of Elders and the ability to influence policy decisions that affected the entire Federation. It was everything a person seeking power might have wanted. Foster declined the position. Instead, he asked to remain as a field coordinator, someone who would work directly with species and civilizations to help them understand how Deathworld principles could strengthen their defenses and their response to crisis. He wanted to remain connected to people in real situations, not become lost in bureaucracy and politics. Grace Morrison walked into his office without knocking. She had been promoted to commander and now coordinated communication networks across the entire Federation. She carried a datapad that showed new information about harvester activity in deep space. Faint signals, distant but growing clearer, suggested that more of the ancient vessels were beginning to wake from their hibernation. How many? Foster asked, looking at the data. At least 12 that we can detect, Grace replied. But intelligence suggests there could be many more. The harvesters did not travel as individuals. They operated in great fleets. If the entire fleet is waking, we could be facing hundreds of vessels within the next few years. Foster absorbed this information without visible emotion. The threat was real and it was growing. But that was exactly why all of this work mattered. Every civilization that learned Deathworld tactics, every species that understood how to fight for survival with desperation and determination, made the galaxy stronger. On Earth itself, something remarkable was happening. The United Nations had established the first Galactic Defense Training Center on the African continent. Young humans from every nation were arriving to learn advanced military tactics and then being dispatched to teach those tactics to other species. Humans had suddenly become teachers, mentors, and guides for civilizations that had existed millions of years before humanity even developed written language. The Verdanti scientist named Green Reaching, the young plant being who had sent the first message about the harvesters, had recovered from her injuries and requested assignment to the Galactic Defense Initiative. She wanted to work alongside humans to develop new strategies. She wanted to understand how a species that had evolved facing predators could teach peaceful beings how to become warriors when necessary. Dr. Elena Vasquez had established medical protocols that combined human trauma techniques with the biological knowledge of a dozen other species. She was training doctors from across the Federation to respond to crisis situations in ways that violated their training but saved lives. Some of the elder medical establishments resisted, claiming that her methods were too unconventional, but the results spoke for themselves. More beings survived critical situations when Elena's techniques were applied. Engineer Marcus Phillips had become a legend in the shipyards of the Federation. Ships built according to his modified designs could perform maneuvers that seemed to violate the laws of physics. They could survive damage that should have been catastrophic. They could push their engines beyond safe operating limits and somehow hold together. The secret was simple. Instead of designing systems to prevent failure, Phillips designed systems that could fail gracefully, continuing to function even when damaged. Officer Kyle Harrison's first class at the Deathworld Tactics Academy consisted of officers from 20 different species. They came from civilizations that had never known warfare. They came from species whose entire philosophy was based on peace and cooperation. And they came to learn from humans how to become something new. They came to learn how to fight. The training was brutal but not violent. Kyle taught them how to think like predators without becoming predatory. He taught them how to make decisions under extreme stress. He taught them how to work as a unit when individual survival might seem more logical. He taught them human tactics, yes, but more importantly, he taught them human philosophy. He taught them that sometimes the only way to survive was to accept that survival might not be possible, and to fight anyway. Foster attended one of Kyle's training sessions. He watched as a Luminar, a crystalline being of pure intellect, attempted to execute a combat maneuver that involved accepting damage to protect a teammate. The Luminar's natural instinct was to preserve itself. The concept of sacrificing part of its structure to save another being was alien to its entire existence. But as Kyle guided the exercise, the Luminar began to understand something profound. By protecting the team, it was actually protecting itself. By accepting the possibility of damage, it was increasing the chances of overall survival. That evening, Foster received a visitor. Philosopher of Stars had traveled from Coalition space to see how the new initiatives were progressing. The ancient Krell was fully healed now, though he moved more slowly than before his injuries. He carried with him a gift, an artifact from the ruins that the Coalition had discovered on the rogue planet. The artifact was a crystalline structure, similar to the warning messages but smaller and more portable. When activated, it displayed images and information about the ancient civilization that had created the warnings. The species was called the Architects. They had been galactic-scale builders and engineers. They had created structures that spanned entire solar systems, and then suddenly they had vanished, leaving behind only these warning messages about the Harvesters. We have learned more about what happened millions of years ago, Philosopher of Stars explained. The Architects were not destroyed by the Harvesters. They were consumed by them. The Harvesters are more than just predators. They are something worse. They consume civilizations not for food but for knowledge. They absorb understanding, technology, and culture, and then they seek the next civilization to consume. Foster understood the implications immediately. The Harvesters were not just a military threat. They were an extinction-level threat to everything that the Federation had built. If the Harvesters consumed enough civilizations, they would become unstoppable. They would have accumulated centuries' worth of technological knowledge and tactical understanding. They would know every possible defense strategy because they would have defeated every species that had ever tried to use those strategies. Then we need to give them something they have never encountered, Foster said quietly. We need to give them desperation. We need to give them species that will not surrender, that will not negotiate, that will not allow themselves to be consumed. We need to give them Deathworlders. Philosopher of Stars nodded slowly. Yes, that is why I have come. The Coalition has formally requested that humanity become the primary fighting force of the Federation. Not because you are the strongest, but because you are the most willing. The other species will support you. The other species will learn from you. But when the Harvesters return in force, it will be humans who stand at the front. It will be Deathworlders who refuse to accept extinction. Foster felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders. It was not a weight he had sought, but it was one he had always known would come. Humans had answered the call for help on that day near the Kepler Nebula. That single act of answering had changed everything. It had revealed to the galaxy that humanity possessed something valuable. And now the galaxy was asking humanity to become the sword and shield that would protect them all. But Foster was not afraid. He thought of Earth, of the world that had shaped his species. He thought of the predators that had hunted humans for millions of years. He thought of how humans had survived not by being the strongest, but by being the most adaptable, the most determined, the most willing to fight for those they cared about. Tell the Council that humanity accepts this responsibility, Foster said. The Federation command ship Constellation arrived at the coordinates of the destroyed Nexus Prime 3 hours after the Harvesters disappeared. Admiral Victoria Grant was an old soldier who had served the Federation for 40 years. She had seen many things in her long military career, But nothing had prepared her for what she found when she reviewed the complete records of the incident near the Kepler Nebula. A merchant vessel had held the line against 3 harvester ships. A crew of ordinary traders had protected members of the scientific coalition. A captain who was not trained as a warrior had made decisions that should have resulted in the destruction of his ship and the death of everyone aboard. Instead, Captain Daniel Foster and his crew had survived. More importantly, they had ensured that the coalition members survived as well. Admiral Grant made her way to the medical bay of the Horizon's Call, where Dr. Elena Vasquez was still working with coalition specialists who had been dispatched from Federation space. The 4 survivors were stable now, though their recovery would be long and difficult. Philosopher of Stars was conscious and aware, despite his severe injuries. When Admiral Grant entered the medical chamber, the ancient Krell's eyes focused on her with surprising clarity. The old alien spoke slowly but with purpose. "I am grateful to see you, Admiral." The humans answered our call. They did not have to come. Their vessel was not designed for combat. Their crew was not trained for this kind of danger. Yet they came anyway. That is something we had forgotten how to do. Admiral Grant listened carefully as Philosopher of Stars told the complete story of the discovery at the ruins, the warnings from the ancient civilization, and the revelation that the Federation had been hiding knowledge about the harvesters for millions of years. The old alien did not hide his disappointment at this deception. The Federation, which was supposed to protect all its members, had kept critical information from the very civilizations that needed it most. The Admiral's response was measured and professional, but there was anger beneath her calm exterior. She had served the Federation faithfully for decades, believing in its mission and its principles. To learn that the elder leadership had been lying about an existential threat was a betrayal of everything she had worked for. "The Council of Elders will need to answer for this," Admiral Grant said. "But first, we need to focus on the immediate situation. The harvesters have emerged from hibernation, and their return suggests that others of their kind may follow. We need to understand how many of them there are and what their intentions might be." Back on the Horizon's Call's bridge, Captain Foster was experiencing something he had never expected. He was becoming famous. Messages were arriving from across the galaxy. News of the merchant vessel that had fought the harvesters was spreading through every communication network. Some people called the crew heroes. Others questioned why a simple trading ship had accomplished what Federation warships had not. Officer Kyle Harrison showed Foster some of the messages arriving from military academies and research institutions. He laughed quietly, shaking his head at the absurdity of it all. They had simply done what seemed right at the time. They had not been trying to prove anything to the galaxy, or to make a statement about humanity's place in the universe. "They want me to teach at their academies," Kyle said, reading through one of the official proposals. "They want to learn our tactics. They say that human Deathworld combat strategy is something that needs to be studied and understood across all Federation military forces." Foster did not know what to make of this attention. He was not a tactician or a military genius. He was a captain who had made decisions based on his understanding of his crew and his faith in their ability to adapt to impossible situations. That was all. Yet somehow this simple approach to survival and courage was being viewed as revolutionary by species that had existed for millions of years. Lieutenant Grace Morrison was contacted by communications specialists who wanted to understand how she had detected the harvester vessel's approach. Her early warning systems had given them the precious minutes they needed to prepare. The other species wanted to know what human intuition and pattern recognition could teach them about monitoring for hidden threats. Dr. Elena Vasquez found herself at the center of a medical revolution. The techniques she had used to treat coalition members combined human trauma medicine with improvisation and what some would call controlled desperation. Species that had spent millions of years developing perfect medical protocols suddenly realized that perfection was not always the answer. Sometimes survival required doing things that violated every established rule, and somehow that worked better than anything that followed the protocols. Engineer Marcus Phillips received offers from every major shipbuilding consortium in the Federation. They wanted to know how he had modified the Horizon's Call to perform impossible maneuvers and maintain shields under impossible stress conditions. He had broken every rule of engineering design, and somehow the ship had held together. Within a week, the Federation Council of Elders called an emergency session. Representatives from every major civilization gathered to discuss the revelation of the harvester threat and the question of how to respond. The meeting was heated and filled with accusations. The elder species had allowed the younger civilizations to develop without knowledge of the returning threat. The Federation's primary mission to protect its members had been compromised by the desire to keep certain knowledge restricted to the eldest races. Captain Foster was invited to address the council. He had never imagined he would stand before the leaders of the galaxy and discuss matters of cosmic importance. He was simply a merchant captain, but the council wanted to hear from him. They wanted to understand what it meant to be a Deathworlder, and how that fact had allowed humanity to respond in ways that other species could not. Foster stood before the assembled leaders of 1,000 worlds and tried to explain something that was difficult to put into words. He spoke about Earth. He spoke about growing up on a planet where danger was constant and survival was not guaranteed. He spoke about humans evolving not as creatures that feared death, but as creatures that understood it and made peace with it. "When we answer a call for help," Foster said, his voice steady and clear, "we do not calculate the odds of success. We do not create strategic assessments about whether rescue is possible. We answer because someone needs help. We answer because that is who we are. On Earth, our species survived because we helped each other. We protected those who could not protect themselves. We worked together even when it seemed pointless. That is not a weakness. That is our greatest strength." The council listened. Some of them understood immediately. Others took time to comprehend what Foster was saying. But slowly a new understanding began to form. The younger species, the Deathworlders, possessed qualities that the peaceful civilizations had lost over millions of years of safe, ordered development. They possessed the will to fight for others. They possessed the determination to survive against impossible odds. They possessed the courage to do what needed to be done. Within a month, the Federation made formal decisions. First, all information about the harvesters and the ancient threat would be declassified and shared with every civilization in the Federation. The era of secrets was ending. Second, humanity would be elevated in status from a junior member to a full partner in Federation defense. Humans would serve as guardians and protectors, not because they were the strongest, but because they understood something fundamental about protecting others. Third, and most importantly, the Federation would establish a new division focused on understanding Deathworld tactics and philosophy. Humans would teach other species how to respond to crisis situations with the adaptability and fierce determination that their evolution had given them. The galaxy would learn from the youngest species the lessons that the oldest species had forgotten. Captain Daniel Foster refused all personal accolades and promotions. He asked instead to lead this new division, to help other civilizations understand what it meant to be a Deathworlder. He wanted to ensure that when the harvesters returned, and he had no doubt that they would return, the galaxy would be ready, not just militarily, but spiritually and philosophically ready to fight for survival with everything they possessed. The coalition members recovered slowly. Philosopher of Stars spent weeks in medical care, but eventually he was well enough to travel. When he was preparing to return to coalition space, he requested one final meeting with Captain Foster. The ancient Krell placed what appeared to be a hand on Foster's shoulder. "You have changed everything, human captain. Your species has taught us that courage is not found in advanced technology or ancient knowledge. Courage is found in the willingness to risk everything for those who cannot help themselves. The galaxy will not forget this lesson. The galaxy will remember that when the SOS reached the wrong ears, the Deathworlders answered, and because they answered, everything changed." Foster watched as Philosopher of Stars boarded the Federation transport that would carry him home. Around him, the Horizons Call's crew worked on repairs and upgrades that would prepare them for their new role in the galaxy. The merchant vessel that had answered a distress call had become something more. The evacuation was chaos and precision working together in a way that only trained professionals could manage. The Horizons Call had broken away from the Harvester's assault, its engines screaming as Marcus Phillips pushed them to their absolute limits. The damage to the ship was severe. Sections of the hull were breached. The left shield generator was completely destroyed. But the ship was still flying, and it still had purpose. Captain Foster had moved the coalition members to specialized medical containers designed for emergency transport. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked with speed and efficiency, using techniques that seemed to contradict every medical protocol she had ever learned. She combined human trauma medicine with what little she understood about coalition biology. She improvised solutions, creating treatments on the spot that should not have worked but somehow did. Officer Kyle Harrison coordinated the transfer from the dying station to the waiting vessel. The Nexus Prime was breaking apart around them. Sections that had survived the first attack were now crumbling into space. The shields were failing. The life support was nearly gone. They had perhaps minutes before the entire station ceased to exist. But the harvesters were not pursuing. The three massive vessels hung in space, their weapon systems silent. It was as if they were waiting for something. Kyle noticed this and reported it to Captain Foster immediately. "They are not attacking," Kyle said through the communication system. "They are holding position. All weapon systems are powered but not firing." Foster felt a chill run down his spine. This was not the behavior of a hunter that had cornered its prey. This was the behavior of something that was planning something else, something worse. Grace Morrison's voice came through the bridge communication system with urgent news. "Captain, I am picking up multiple Federation vessels approaching from the interior territories. The emergency beacon you broadcast is being answered. 12 ships are already on intercept courses with our position. More are being dispatched from across the sector." The situation had changed fundamentally. The harvesters were no longer facing a single merchant vessel and a damaged research station. They were facing the beginning of a Federation response. The ancient threat that the galaxy had tried to forget was now suddenly real and present, and every major military power was taking notice. Foster understood what was happening. The harvesters had achieved their primary objective. They had destroyed the Nexus Prime and eliminated the source of the ancient warnings. The coalition members who might have shared knowledge about the threat were either dead or dying. The ruins on the planet below were now unguarded and could be destroyed if the harvesters chose to do so. What the harvesters had not accomplished was preventing the message from spreading. They had failed to keep the threat secret. The galaxy now knew that the harvesters had returned. The galaxy now knew that an ancient extinction-level threat had emerged from hibernation. The final coalition member was loaded onto the Horizon's call. Dr. Elena Vasquez sealed the transport container and activated the stasis field that would keep the ancient Krell alive long enough to reach proper medical facilities. Philosopher of Stars, despite his injuries and his age, managed to transmit a final message to Captain Foster. "You have done what we could not do," the old Krell said, his words slow and careful. "You have survived. You have preserved knowledge. You have ensured that others would know. Your species shows promise, human captain. Your people understand things that we have forgotten. You understand that some things are worth dying for." Foster felt the weight of those words. He was not a soldier. He was not a hero. He was a merchant captain who had answered a distress call. But in doing so, he and his crew had become something more. They had become proof that Deathworlders, the young species that the galaxy had largely ignored, possessed qualities that mattered, qualities that made a difference in the face of overwhelming darkness. The Horizon's call disengaged from the remains of the Nexus Prime and began accelerating away from the harvesters. The massive ancient vessels did not pursue. They remained stationary, their weapons powered but unused. It was as if they were satisfied with the destruction they had caused and were willing to let this one merchant vessel escape with its precious cargo of coalition survivors. Then something unexpected happened. One of the harvester vessels opened a communication channel. The signal was old, harsh, and filled with static and strange harmonics that the ship's communication system struggled to process. When the translation protocols finally decoded the message, it was simple and terrifying. "This is not over. We will return. We will consume all. Prepare for the harvest." And then the three harvester vessels disappeared into faster-than-light speed, vanishing from the scanners as quickly as they had appeared. Foster stood on the bridge of the Horizon's call, watching the space where the harvesters had been. Around him, his crew worked frantically to assess damage and begin repairs. Marcus Phillips was already reporting on the structural integrity of the ship and what would need to be done to make it spaceworthy for the journey home. Kyle Harrison was monitoring the approaching Federation vessels and relaying information about their arrival times and intentions. But Foster's mind was elsewhere. The message from the harvesters echoed in his thoughts. "We will return. We will consume all. It was not a boast or a threat delivered out of anger. It was a simple statement of fact. The harvesters had been destroyed millions of years ago, or so the ancient civilizations had believed. But they had only been dormant, and now they were awake again. Dr. Elena Vasquez entered the bridge, exhaustion written across her features. She had done everything possible for the coalition members, using every technique and every ounce of her medical knowledge. She reported that all 4 survivors were stable, though their conditions remained critical. "They asked about you," Elena told Foster. "They wanted to know if the human captain was safe. They wanted to know if the message had been sent successfully." Foster nodded. "Tell them yes. Tell them that the galaxy now knows. Tell them that we will not forget, and that we will not let the threat be hidden again." As the Federation vessels began to arrive, Foster realized what had truly happened in the depths of space near the Kepler Nebula. Humanity had not defeated the Harvesters. The ancient threat was far too powerful for that. But humanity had done something else. They had shown the galaxy that Deathworlders were more than primitive warriors or simple colonists trying to find their place in a civilized universe. Humans were the bridge between the elder civilizations and the returning threat. Humans possessed something that had been lost to the peaceful species over millions of years. Humans had desperation. Humans had the will to survive when survival seemed impossible. Humans made choices that logic could not explain and that reason could not justify. Humans did what needed to be done, regardless of the cost. The Federation's military commanders arrived on the Horizon's call, and Captain Foster began the process of debrief and explanation. He told them about the Nexus Prime. He told them about the ancient warnings. He told them about the Harvesters and their promise to return. He told them about the coalition members who had risked everything to discover the truth. And when he was finished, the Federation commanders looked at this young merchant captain and his crew of ordinary traders with new respect. In the darkness of space, when everything was falling apart, humans had answered the call. Humans had held the line. Humans had made sure that the truth would be heard. The galaxy would never be the same. The old order was crumbling. The secrets that the elder civilizations had kept were now exposed. And the youngest species, the ones everyone had underestimated, had proven themselves to be essential, not because they were the strongest or the most advanced, but because they understood something fundamental about survival and courage that the other species had lost. The scanners began to light up with warnings approximately 4 hours after the Horizon's call docked with the Nexus Prime. Lieutenant Grace Morrison's voice came through the communication system with urgent clarity. 3 massive vessels were approaching from deep space, moving at speeds that seemed almost impossible. Their trajectories made it clear that they were heading directly for the research station. Captain Foster stood in the central hub of the Nexus Prime, looking at the holographic display that showed the approaching threat. The ships were unlike anything in any Federation database. Their hulls appeared organic, as if they were living things rather than mechanical constructs. They seemed to absorb light, their surfaces dark and difficult to focus on even when displayed as simple silhouettes on a screen. The weapon systems mounted on their frames were instruments of terrible purpose, calibrated and refined by millions of years of violence. Officer Kyle Harrison was already calculating firing solutions and defensive possibilities. The numbers were not good. The Horizon's call's weapon systems were designed to handle pirates and small military vessels. They were not designed to engage 3 ships that were each nearly twice the size of the merchant vessel. The Nexus Prime's defenses had been disabled by the earlier attack. "They were essentially defenseless, Captain," Kyle reported, his voice steady but tight with stress. "Those ships will be in firing range within 10 minutes. We need to make a decision about evacuation." Foster looked at Philosopher of Stars, who was still conscious despite his injuries. The ancient Krell's eyes held resignation and acceptance. He had lived for over 10,000 years. He had seen civilizations rise and fall. He had expected to die someday, just not like this. The scientist raised what appeared to be a hand, and Foster understood the gesture. The coalition members could not be moved. They would not survive evacuation. They were choosing to remain and face whatever was coming. Dr. Elena Vasquez appeared at Foster's side, her face showing the strain of the situation. She had done everything she could for the coalition members, but there were limits to what medical science could achieve. "They are stable for now," she said quietly, "but moving them would kill them. And even if we could get them to the ship, the acceleration would be too much for their weakened bodies to handle. Foster made his choice. It was not a choice he made lightly, but it was the only choice that made sense to him. We are not evacuating. We are staying. Kyle Harrison's eyes widened slightly. Captain, that is suicide. We cannot fight those ships. I did not say we were going to fight them, Foster replied. I said we were staying. There is a difference. He opened a communication channel to the Horizon's call. Marcus Phillips answered immediately, his chief engineer's voice questioning, but ready. Foster gave him orders that seemed strange, but which Marcus understood immediately. This was not the first time their captain had asked them to do something unconventional. Get every ounce of power you can squeeze from those engines, Foster commanded. Increase power to the shields and keep them stable. I want you ready to move, but do not leave. We are going to do something that the harvesters will not expect. Officer Kyle Harrison suddenly understood what his captain was planning. A small smile crossed his face. The smile of a man who recognized a strategy that was either brilliant or suicidal, and probably both. He began entering commands into the station's defense systems, preparing to coordinate the Horizon's call's weapons with the few remaining defensive capabilities of the Nexus Prime. The 3 harvester vessels entered weapons range and began their assault. Their weapons were terrible to behold. Energy beams that twisted space itself, projectiles that seemed to phase through normal matter. The first volley struck the Nexus Prime with the force of an asteroid impact. Entire sections of the station that had survived the initial attack were simply obliterated, erased from existence as if they had never been. But Captain Foster had anticipated this. He had moved the coalition members to the most heavily shielded section of the station, a chamber designed to protect against radiation leaks and internal explosions. Marcus Phillips had routed power to this specific location, creating a pocket of protection in the heart of the dying station. The Horizon's call engaged the harvester vessels with every weapon it possessed. The merchant vessel was fast and maneuverable in ways that larger military ships could not match. Kyle Harrison flew erratic patterns that seemed random and chaotic, making the ship a difficult target. The harvesters' targeting systems were sophisticated, but they were designed to track conventional military vessels that followed predictable movement patterns. Human Deathworld tactics were something entirely different. Foster returned to the observation deck of the Nexus Prime and watched the battle unfold. The Horizon's call was taking damage. Her shields flared with each strike from the harvester weapons. Her hull showed scars from near misses that would have been direct hits against any other vessel. But she was still flying, still fighting, still placing herself between the harvesters and the research station. What the ancient civilizations did not understand was that humans came from a world where survival had never been guaranteed. Humans had evolved with predators, competing against creatures that wanted to kill them. Humans had developed as a species that understood violence, not as an abstract concept but as a daily reality. The harvesters expected their enemies to make logical, calculated decisions. They expected civilizations to surrender when the odds became unfavorable. Humans did not surrender. Humans found new angles. Humans adapted. Humans made decisions that no logical being would make, because humans had learned long ago that logic alone was not always enough. Kyle Harrison performed a maneuver that should have been impossible. He brought the Horizon's call into a trajectory that put the Nexus Prime between the ship and 2 of the harvester vessels. Then he opened all weapon ports at maximum power. The harvesters could not fire without hitting the station. It was a hostage situation in reverse, with the station itself held hostage against the harvesters' desire to destroy it. But there were 3 harvester vessels, not 2. The third ship broke formation and moved to flank the Horizon's call. Kyle realized too late what was happening. The new trajectory would bring the third harvester directly into firing position. Foster made a decision that surprised even himself. He activated the Nexus Prime's remaining engine systems, pushing them far beyond their safe operating parameters. The damaged research station, held together only by shields and determination, began to move. It accelerated directly into the path of the third harvester vessel. It was not a conscious choice on the station's part. It was simply physics and momentum and human desperation applied to a situation that demanded action. The Nexus Prime struck the third harvester with the force of a falling moon. The impact was catastrophic. The station's weakened structure shattered like glass. But not before the collision had knocked the harvester vessel off course and damaged its weapon systems. Dr. Elena Vasquez grabbed hold of a railing as the station convulsed. Around her, systems failed and explosions rippled through the corridors. But the Coalition members remained protected in their reinforced chamber, still alive, still safe despite the chaos. Foster activated the emergency evacuation beacon. The signal went out on all frequencies, broadcasting the location and situation to every vessel within 1,000 light years. The message was simple. Humans were dying to protect the Coalition. The galaxy needed to know that. The galaxy needed to understand that sometimes the youngest species, the ones everyone considered primitive, had something important to teach about courage and sacrifice. The harvesters' weapons fell silent. Their 3 vessels, despite their power and their ancient knowledge, had not been able to eliminate a simple merchant vessel and a damaged research station. More importantly, they had failed to silence the message. The truth about the harvesters was now spreading through the galaxy. The ancient threat had been exposed. Through the observation window, Captain Foster watched as Federation defense vessels began appearing on the scanners, responding to the emergency beacon. They would arrive in time, not to save the Nexus Prime, which was now just debris floating in space, but in time to save the survivors. In time to understand that when Deathworlders answered a call for help, they meant it with their entire being. The Nexus Prime hung in space like a broken jewel, its once perfect geometric structure twisted and scarred by forces beyond imagination. Captain Foster watched as the Horizon's call approached the research station, and his stomach tightened with dread. The damage was catastrophic. Entire sections of the station were simply gone, vented into the void. Others glowed with residual heat, their surfaces melted and fused together in jagged patterns that suggested incredible violence. Lieutenant Grace Morrison worked frantically at her station, trying to establish communication with the station's systems. Her voice trembled slightly as she reported what she was finding. Life support was failing in most sectors. Power generation had dropped to critical levels. The main reactor was barely functioning, kept alive by what appeared to be emergency protocols that were themselves on the verge of failure. "I am detecting biological signatures," Grace announced. "They are weak but present. There are survivors inside the station." Dr. Elena Vasquez immediately began preparing the medical bay, though she had no idea what kind of medical emergency they would face. The Coalition species were biologically different from humans in almost every way. The Verdanti were plant-based organisms. The Luminars were crystalline structures that somehow maintained consciousness. The Krell were silicon-based life forms that operated on biological principles that made no sense to human understanding. Elena had studied all of them in her pre-mission training, but studying was not the same as treating them in a crisis situation. Officer Kyle Harrison scanned the area around the station with the Horizon's call's tactical systems. He found something that made his blood run cold. There were energy signatures in the surrounding space, remnants of a conflict that had clearly been one-sided. Whatever had attacked the Nexus Prime had done so with overwhelming force. "Captain," Kyle called out, "I am reading residual weapon discharge patterns around the station." This was not a natural disaster. This was an attack. Foster felt the weight of that statement settle across his shoulders. A natural disaster would have been bad enough. An attack meant that whatever had struck the Nexus Prime could strike again. It meant danger. It meant they might not have much time. "Dock with the station," Foster commanded. "Careful approach. I want shields raised and all defensive systems on standby. Let us not announce our presence more than we already have." The Horizon's call maneuvered with surprising grace for a merchant vessel. Marcus Phillips guided them toward the station's main docking bay, which still had atmospheric containment despite the surrounding damage. The connection was made smoothly, and the airlocks aligned perfectly. Within minutes, Foster, Dr. Elena Vasquez, and Officer Kyle Harrison had suited up and entered the station. The interior of the Nexus Prime was a nightmare of emergency lighting and silence. The only sounds were the soft hiss of failing life support systems and the occasional groan of stressed metal structures adjusting to their new, damaged configuration. The team made their way through corridors that were either too hot or too cold, past sections that showed the scars of whatever had attacked the station. They found the Coalition members in the central research chamber, clustered together in a sealed section that still had minimal life support. The Verdanti appeared as though they were dying. Their usually vibrant green surfaces turned dull and brown. The luminars had cracked, their internal light dim and flickering. The Krell lay motionless, their silicon forms cracked and leaking strange fluids. An ancient Krell scientist named Philosopher of Stars managed to focus attention on the arriving humans. His voice was weak, but his words carried weight. He explained what had happened in slow, careful sentences that seemed to cost him tremendous effort. 3 days ago, the Nexus Prime had detected unusual energy readings emanating from the rogue planet below. The Coalition had sent exploration teams to investigate ancient ruins that were far older than any known civilization. The ruins contained warnings, messages carved into crystal structures by an ancient race that had vanished millions of years ago. The messages spoke of something called the Harvesters. The messages warned that the Harvesters would return, and that all who encountered them must hide or face extinction. The Coalition scientists had begun the process of deciphering the ancient warnings when something changed. The sun orbiting this star system had emitted a massive solar flare, far more intense and directed than any natural phenomenon. The flare had struck the Nexus Prime with pinpoint accuracy, destroying specific systems and targeting particular areas of the station. Dr. Elena Vasquez ran her medical scanner over the Coalition members and made a horrifying discovery. The radiation from the flare was not random. It was engineered. The specific wavelengths and intensities had been calculated to be most damaging to plant-based biology. The Verdanti had been hit hardest because their photosynthetic nature made them extremely vulnerable to concentrated energy of that specific frequency. This was deliberate, Elena said quietly, as if speaking the words aloud could somehow make them less true. Someone or something knew exactly what kind of damage would be most effective against your species. Philosopher of Stars moved his cracked form slightly, a gesture that probably expressed agreement or resignation or both. We received a message after the flare struck, he said. It was not in any language we recognized, but we understood the meaning. Destroy your communication systems or face destruction. Delete all data about the ruins and the warnings. Erase everything you have learned. And did you? Foster asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. We were about to comply, the ancient Krell replied. But our youngest scientist, a verdant named Green Reaching, was faster than we were. She sent a message into the void, broadcasting everything we had discovered to every frequency she could reach. She did this knowing it would trigger a response. She did this so that someone else would know, so that the knowledge would not die with us. Kyle Harrison moved to a nearby console and began examining its data. His fingers worked across the controls, accessing files and data streams that the Coalition had managed to preserve. His eyes widened as he read what was stored there. The warnings from the ancient civilization were specific and detailed. The Harvesters were a species that consumed knowledge and life alike. They had destroyed countless worlds millions of years ago. They had been thought extinct, but the ruins suggested they had only gone dormant. There is more, Philosopher of Stars continued. The Federation knows about the Harvesters. This knowledge is restricted, held by only the eldest civilizations. The threat is not new, it is simply forgotten or hidden. And now, by investigating the ruins, we have drawn attention to ourselves. We have awakened something that the galaxy has been praying would never return. Foster understood what the old alien was saying. The Federation had not warned them about the Harvesters. The Federation had kept this knowledge secret. The Federation had allowed worlds to develop and civilizations to flourish in ignorance of a threat that might come again. And when that threat finally reappeared, humanity had answered the distress call instead of the Federation. How long do we have? Foster asked. The Krell scientist was quiet for a moment. If our calculations are correct, and if the Harvesters respond to the broadcast young Green Reaching sent, they could arrive here within hours, perhaps less. Dr. Elena Vasquez began work immediately, using every technique she knew to stabilize the Coalition members. Officer Kyle Harrison studied the data about the Harvesters, trying to understand what kind of weapons or defenses might be effective against them. Captain Foster stood at the observation port, looking out at space, considering impossible choices. They had come to rescue people. They had succeeded in reaching the Nexus Prime and finding survivors. But in doing so, they had also placed themselves directly in the path of something that had destroyed civilizations. The Horizon's Call was a merchant vessel with minimal weapons. The Nexus Prime was damaged and dying, and somewhere in the darkness of space, ancient killers were beginning to move again. Foster turned away from the window and looked at his crew. They were afraid. He could see it in their eyes. But they were also determined. They had answered the call for help, and they would not abandon it now, no matter what was coming toward them through the stars. Captain Daniel Foster stood at the observation deck of the Horizon's Call, staring into the endless darkness of space. The merchant vessel was small, designed for trading expeditions to the outer rim territories of the galaxy. Foster had commanded this ship for 5 years, and he knew every inch of its systems like the back of his hand. His crew was experienced and loyal, but they were not soldiers. They were traders, explorers, and adventurers who sought profit and discovery in equal measure. The universe was a vast place, and humanity had only recently joined the greater galactic community. Earth had been recognized as a developing world, and humans were still learning the rules of a civilization that spanned thousands of worlds and hundreds of species. The United Galactic Federation treated humanity with polite indifference. Some of the elder races saw them as promising newcomers. Others saw them as dangerous. Most simply ignored them. Foster did not mind the indifference. He was content to fly through the stars, conduct his business, and return home to Earth with profits that made his investors happy. Today, however, something was different. Something was wrong with the signals his communication officer was receiving. Lieutenant Grace Morrison sat at her station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that glowed soft blue in the darkness of the bridge. She was young, brilliant, and had a gift for detecting patterns in cosmic noise that confused other operators. Her face showed concentration as she adjusted various frequencies, trying to isolate a signal that was barely registering on their equipment. Foster moved toward her station. Grace looked up and he saw concern in her eyes. That was unusual. Grace rarely showed concern about anything. "Captain," she said quietly, "I am picking up a distress signal. It is faint, very faint, but it is there. I can identify the source." Foster leaned closer to the holographic display. "Location: approximately 48 light hours from our current position," Grace replied. "Near the Kepler Nebula. The signal is encoded in Federation standard format, which means it comes from one of the authorized stations or research vessels." Foster stood up straight, processing the information. A distress signal in Federation standard format meant that whoever was sending it was authorized to broadcast on secure channels. It also meant they were far from home and in serious trouble. The Federation had strict protocols for distress signals. A ship or station would not activate them unless the situation was truly dire. "Can you identify the source?" Foster asked. Grace worked her controls for several seconds. A new display appeared showing ancient symbols and designations that seemed to shimmer on the screen. "The signal identifies the source as Nexus Prime. It is a research station operated by the Scientific Coalition." Foster felt the weight of that information. The Scientific Coalition was an alliance of some of the oldest and most respected civilizations in the galaxy. The Verdanti, a species of plant-like beings who communicated through vibrations in the earth and air. The Luminars, crystalline entities whose intelligence was almost impossible to measure by conventional standards. The Krell, ancient philosophers who had witnessed the rise and fall of a dozen civilizations. These were not species that made mistakes or called for help lightly. "Engineering," Foster called out. "This is the captain. I need you to calculate the time and fuel requirements to reach coordinates 48 light hours from our current position." The response came quickly from Marcus Phillips, the Horizon's Call's chief engineer. His voice was calm and professional, the voice of a man who had worked in the depths of starship engines long enough to develop the patience of someone who talked to machines more than people. "Captain, that would require us to adjust our course significantly and burn fuel reserves at maximum capacity. At our current load and destination, we would arrive at the coordinates in 3 days. However, we would need to refuel at a Federation station or divert toward the nearest colony world to make it back to Earth." Foster did not hesitate. He had already made his decision the moment Grace mentioned the distress signal. Some captains would have reported the signal to the nearest Federation outpost and continued their journey. Those captains were probably wealthier and had fewer complications in their lives. Foster had never been that kind of captain. "Set course for those coordinates," Foster commanded. "Maximum velocity. Marcus, do whatever you need to do to get us there safely." He turned to face the bridge crew. Engineer Marcus Phillips's face appeared on a small communication screen, his weathered features showing no surprise. Officer Kyle Harrison, the ship's tactical specialist, gave a small nod. He was a young man with sharp eyes and hands that moved with the precision of someone who had been trained in combat situations. Medical Officer Dr. Elena Vasquez looked up from her station with a mixture of concern and resignation. She had seen this pattern before. "We are responding to the distress call," Foster announced. "I want all crew members to their stations. We may be walking into a situation that requires quick thinking and excellent performance from every one of us. This is not a guaranteed rescue. There may be complications, but we are going to try." The Horizon's call changed direction and its engines roared to life with a sound like distant thunder. Foster could feel the vibration through the deck plates beneath his feet. The small merchant vessel had never been designed for speed, but Marcus Phillips had modified her systems over the years to squeeze out every possible bit of performance. Now those modifications would be put to the test. As the ship accelerated into the darkness, Foster returned to the observation deck. The stars stretched into lines of light as they entered faster than light travel. Somewhere ahead at the edge of the Kepler Nebula, a research station operated by the oldest civilizations in the galaxy was calling for help. Foster did not know what they would find when they arrived. He did not know if they could actually help. He only knew that a distress signal had reached his ears, and his conscience would not allow him to ignore it. Grace Morrison joined him at the observation window. Her young face reflected the starlight, and her expression showed the same determination that Foster felt burning in his own chest. "Do you think we can help them?" she asked. Foster considered the question carefully. The coalition consisted of species that had existed for millions of years. They had technology far beyond what humans possessed. They had knowledge and resources that humans could barely imagine. What could a small merchant vessel with a crew of dedicated but ordinary people possibly offer them? "I do not know," Foster answered honestly. "But I know that when someone calls for help, you answer. That is what humans do. That is who we are. We may not be the strongest or the most advanced, but we answer. Whatever happens when we reach Nexus Prime, at least they will know that someone came. At least they will know they were not forgotten." The Horizon's call continued its journey through the stars, carrying a crew of humans toward a mystery that would change everything they thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. Behind them, Earth rotated silently in space, unaware that one of its children was about to prove what Deathworlders could really do.